You know, back in August of 1945, two moments, just 3 days apart, brought the deadliest war in human history to a shocking, violent end. But they also unleashed a power that would forever alter our world, kicking off a new age where humanity suddenly held the power to destroy itself. So today, we're going to take a careful, respectful look at the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, events that didn't just end a war, but cast a shadow that, let's be honest, we are all still living under today.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, we've got to look at it from a few different angles. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the brutal reality of the war itself, then walk through how the bomb was even created and the impossible decision to use it. From there, we'll witness what happened on the ground, and finally, we'll grapple with the surrender and the incredible legacy of these weapons. Each piece of the story builds on the last. Okay, let's start here. Picture this. It's the morning of August 6th, 1945. A single American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, is soaring high above the city of Hiroshima. Down below, people are just starting their day. But in less than a minute, their world, and really our world, is about to be changed, fundamentally and forever. When you look at this timeline, it's just wild. It basically compresses an entire apocalypse into just 43 seconds. It's a chilling breakdown of just how fast everything happened. You know, just 1 second after that detonation, a blast wave moving with unimaginable force just erased buildings and lives. And by the time 45 seconds had passed, that terrifying, iconic mushroom cloud was already climbing miles into the sky. It was like a tombstone for an entire city. But wait, to even begin to understand why this weapon was used, we have to rewind and look at the Pacific War in 1945. This wasn't a conflict that was just kind of winding down. No way. It was actually escalating into its most bloody and brutal phase. The Allies were getting closer and closer to Japan, but every single step forward came at this staggering, almost unbelievable cost in human lives. And this right here, this chart shows you the horrible dilemma Allied leaders were facing. The recent battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa were just a horrifying preview of what an invasion of Japan would look like. Based on that carnage, military planners working on Operation Downfall, the plan for a full-scale invasion, were projecting American casualties anywhere from 250,000 to over 1 million. And Japanese casualties, they were expected to be in the many, many millions. This was the grim alternative that was haunting every single decision. So in late July, the Allies issued one last ultimatum from Potsdam, Germany. It demanded Japan's unconditional surrender and laid out the terms. And it ended with this really stark warning, which, looking back, was chillingly literal. Japan's government, however, responded with a single word: mokusatsu. Now that can mean a few things, like to ignore or even to kill with silence. But the bottom line was clear. They rejected the demand, and that set the stage for everything that came next. Okay, so now let's turn to how this weapon even came to exist in the first place. Because while the war was raging out in the open, there was another war being fought. A secret one. A war of science, happening in hidden labs and secret cities all across America. It was a race to build a weapon based on the fundamental forces of the universe. A weapon of truly unimaginable power. I mean, just look at this timeline. The pace is just staggering. From a theoretical warning in a letter from Albert Einstein to a successful test, it took just 6 years. The Manhattan Project was this massive effort, costing $2 billion and employing over 130,000 people, all sworn to absolute secrecy. Its one and only goal was to turn the physics of atomic fission into a real weapon before Nazi Germany could do it first. And then, at 5:29 in the morning on July 16th, 1945, out in the New Mexico desert, the world changed forever. The Trinity test was a success. As that very first mushroom cloud rose into the dawn sky, the project's scientific director, J. Robert Oppenheimer, remembered this line from Hindi scripture. The people who created this thing, they immediately understood its terrifying, world-altering gravity. Humanity had just crossed a really profound and frightening line. All right, so the weapon exists. The question now is, who decides to use it? And that decision fell to one man, Harry S. Truman. He had only become president a few months earlier when Franklin Roosevelt died. And get this, he knew absolutely nothing about the Manhattan Project. So he was suddenly handed the most powerful weapon in history and faced with a truly impossible choice. Imagine being Truman. You're handed this list of options, and every single one is terrible. Each path leads to just staggering death and destruction. I mean, demonstrating the bomb seemed too risky. What if it was a dud, or what if Japan's hardliners just weren't impressed? Continuing the conventional war meant more firebombing and starvation, which hadn't worked yet. The invasion, like we saw, was a total nightmare scenario. And then there was using the new weapon, with its own horrific and unknown consequences. So with the decision made to use the bomb, they had to figure out where. A target committee was formed, and they came up with this cold, strategic checklist. The target had to be militarily important. It had to have a huge psychological impact. And crucially, it had to be basically untouched by earlier bombing raids. That way, the full, unique power of an atomic weapon could be clearly shown. These factors led them to a shortlist, with Hiroshima right at the very top. Okay, now we come to the events themselves, and as we walk through what happened, it's really important to try and move past the strategy and the numbers, and to just comprehend the human scale of the destruction. We're going to approach this with the reverence and sobriety it demands. This is what it was like on the ground. In a single instant, a city of 350,000 people was turned into a vision of hell. Dr. Hachi's account describes a world where the living were almost indistinguishable from the dead, burned so badly you couldn't tell if you were looking at their front or their back. Just walking ghosts in the ruins of their own city, a city that had been perfectly normal only moments before. And then you have the view from 30,000 feet up. Totally different, but just as horrifying in its own way. The crew of the Enola Gay saw this brilliant flash of light, and when they turned back, the city was just gone, replaced by a monstrous boiling cloud. The co-pilot's log entry really says it all. In that moment, the creators came face to face with the reality of their creation. For the people who somehow survived the blast and the firestorm that followed, a new identity was forged in all that suffering. They became the Hibakusha. And this term, it isn't just about survival. It really encompasses a whole lifetime of invisible wounds, from radiation sickness and cancer, deep psychological trauma, and often even social stigma from a society that was afraid of what they'd been through. You'd think that would be it, right? But the world waited. And in Tokyo, nothing. Japan's government was completely paralyzed. The military hardliners were actually arguing that the Americans could only have one bomb like that, and that the war had to go on. Faced with this stalemate, and with the war still costing lives every single day, the U.S. moved forward with plans for a second bombing. 3 days later, the primary target, Kokura, was covered by clouds, so the bomber diverted to its secondary target, a city called Nagasaki. So this second devastating blow, combined with another major world event, finally shattered that deadlock in Tokyo. The war was in its final, agonizing days, and Japan's leaders were forced to face a reality they just couldn't deny anymore. On the very same day as the Nagasaki bombing, the Soviet Union invaded Japanese-held Manchuria, which basically eliminated Japan's last faint hope. So facing destruction from the air and a massive invasion on the mainland, Emperor Hirohito did something basically unheard of. He stepped in personally. He told his war council that they had to bear the unbearable and surrender, and he specifically mentioned the new and most cruel bomb as a key reason. So while the politicians are making these world-changing decisions, the Hibakusha are just trying to survive another minute. Think about it. There are no hospitals left, no doctors, no clean water. They're trying to find food in the ruins, build some kind of shelter. They're searching for their family members, many of whom are just unidentifiable. And all the while, an invisible killer, radiation sickness, is claiming thousands more who had survived the initial blast. All right, for our last section, let's pull the camera back and look at the long shadow these two bombs cast over the rest of the 20th century and, well, right into our own time. Because the story didn't end with Japan's surrender. In a lot of ways, a new, much scarier story for all of us was just beginning. The debate over whether the bombings were justified, man, it started almost the second the bombs fell, and it is still going strong today. It really centers on these core arguments you see here. Was it a necessary evil that actually saved more lives than it took? Or was it an immoral act that targeted civilians when Japan was already on the verge of collapse anyway? There are no easy answers, and our goal here isn't to solve the debate, but to really understand its profound complexity. And this is the really sobering part. The nuclear age that kicked off in 1945, it is far from over. The world didn't disarm, it built more. Today, there are around 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world, many of which are hundreds of times more powerful than the ones used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the threat didn't end with World War II. It multiplied a lot. And that's really where this all leaves us. The memory of these two cities is more than just a history lesson. It's a permanent, urgent warning about our capacity to create tools of our own destruction. The bells that ring in Hiroshima and Nagasaki every August are a reminder of a choice that was made back then, and a choice that, in a way, continues to face all of us today. The question they ask us is, will we listen?